Okay, we're live, Jed.
Well, hello.
Welcome, everybody, to a spontaneous Girl Country conversation with my friend Jed. Um, a long time ago, we had a conversation, Jed, and I was telling you about that dream that I had, which I can run through again briefly if
Yeah,
you want.
yeah, I think that'd be good. Just useful for anybody that's tuning in.
Yeah, and I mentioned in the dream there were these two witnesses, and I didn't know anything more than that about them. And um, you were like, witnesses, and and you just kind of jumped in, and I think you had some insight about that because of some of your explorations of Zen Buddhism.
Uh-huh.
That was the impression I had. I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway. And then I was listening to this conversation on theories of everything,
hmm
and he mentioned the witness thing, and I was like, oh, maybe this is what Jed was talking about, because it really resonated with me. So do you want me to give you a rundown of the dream?
Yeah, let's do that. I think that'd be great.
All right. So I'll do the Reader's Digest condensed version because you know how dreams are.
Yeah.
But it was so there was a it was a public building, like an old mall. That was the feeling I had. It was like an old mall that was closed, and there were people living in there who were homeless,
hmm
but they were and dreams are weird, right? So they were righteous people, whatever that means. That's all I knew. And there were two levels to the mall, and there was a set of stairs going up. And I could see, kind of as an observer, I could see these men outside of it, and they had this big, huge box. Like, it was like taller than they were, and 8 men long, and it was massive. And they shoved it into the front doors of this mall, and then they closed the doors and somehow flipped a lid off and ran out, closed the doors. And this huge serpent came out, and it was black, and it was massive, and it was seeking whom it may devour. That was
hmm
that was its modus operandi, right?
hmm
And it went up the stairs, and it was so big that its tail was still in the box, right? And it got up, and it was at the top of the stairs. It was looking for the two witnesses to kill them.
hmm
And then suddenly I was in the building, and I was in the
hmm
dream, and I remembered that there was a little girl, a little child down in the basement.
Okay.
And I didn't want her. So now that the snake's head was upstairs, I decided to go down into the basement and look for the little girl. And I found her. She was about 3 or 4 years old, and she was wearing a little white nightie. And I remember I could feel how warm and soft her skin was when I picked her up. And I was holding her in front of me, in it, like my hands were like this. She was
hmm
seated and facing out, and her legs were dangling down.
Gotcha.
And I ran up and just went up in this in a side stairwell in the building while this snake was up. And by the time I got up to the main floor and went into the stairwell, he had already killed the two witnesses. And so I knew he was going to be searching for other inhabitants, because these righteous people were living in these empty store fronts.
Gotcha.
And I went up these stairs, and I'm just following the stairs, and I get to this bedroom just on the stairwell. And I'm like, oh. And there's these two girls, one's like about 12 and one's about 16, and they're jumping on the beds and talking and laughing, and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know this was your bedroom. And the stairs continued up, so I just said, I'm just going up. And I went up, and I came to another bedroom at the top, and there was this old woman sitting in a bed, leaning up against the wall. And she had the bed covers up, and there was a mirror on this. And I walked in like this. So she's here. There's a mirror here. And I'm holding this little girl, holding this child. And the woman looks at me and she smiles. And then her face starts shape shifting. she's old, and then she's young, and then she's like a child, and then she's middle-aged, and then, she's older, and then her face becomes a lion, and then, well, it's a lioness, actually. It doesn't have the big mane.
Okay.
Lioness, and then an ape, and the whole time she's wearing these glasses.
Hmm.
and the glasses stay on her face, right? So I know
Okay.
it's always her. It's not different people. It's always
Right.
her, but she's shape-shifting. And when I look in the mirror, and she's just the old lady. And when I look at her, she's doing all this movement, all the shape-shifting of her face,
Hmm.
right? And I said to her, "Who are you?" And the stairs went up and stopped at the ceiling
Hmm.
of her room.
Okay.
And I said to her, "Who are you?" And she just smiled at me, like, knowingly. And I was like, I had this sense like, oh my God, she's me,
Hmm.
And that's how the dream ended.
Interesting.
It was a pretty impactful dream for me. And I realized that, well, I know a few things about dreams, right? So the basement is the subconscious, and the upstairs, or the highest elevation of a building, is the consciousness.
Hmm.
And so to go down to the subconscious and get the child, save the child, that was my
Hmm.
primary mission, right? I had
Right.
to save the child,
Uh-huh.
which, if you're reading any of George MacDonald's stuff, it's super important, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't enter the kingdom of heaven unless you become a little child.
Hmm.
And then moving through the stairwell, it was like moving through the different phases of my life
Uh-huh.
while carrying the child, right?
Yeah.
But the part of the dream that was always really perplexing to me was with the witnesses.
Hmm.
And so when I was listening to this conversation with On Theories of Everything, he talked about the witness in like real serious Buddhist meditation,
Uh-huh.
as being kind of like a third person observer
Right.
of yourself.
Yep.
That is, I'm just gonna like throw in my own take, but I don't know if this is true or not. But it seems to be that third person has the ability to. It's kind of a certain wisdom or something, because it's removed, so it's not stuck in the forest, right? It can see the forest, and if you're in it, you can't see it for the trees, right? So because it's extracted out, then yeah, it has a more holistic view of.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know who the serpent was. I don't know who the men in black were, and I don't know who the two witnesses. Like, that's the part of the dream that is like, wow, that's,
Mhm.
really interesting. So, do you what did you what do you know about this idea of the witness?
Well, I mean, it, it- I mean, I have thoughts on it. To arrive at a point of knowledge is, I feel like there's a somewhat of a vanishing point there, where I don't want to say no, but
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but it's it, I want to return to your vision here in a moment. But what it brings to mind, so 10 years ago almost now, I had what I think was kind of like in some sense, an archetypal awakening of these two witnesses that we see in the book of 11th chapter of
Yeah,
the book of
revelation.
Revelation.
That was my first thought was, you know, but anyways, continue.
Yeah, and so in some sense, these witnesses in that chapter um, seem to be the same two witnesses that are accompanying Christ at the Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah. Like they seem to
Mhm.
exhibit that power prophetic witness in a sense, and their testimony is being given where the Lord is crucified, so Calvary, right? And they have this 3.5 year period where they're testifying in some sense over and against the false witness of the beast that rises from the sea and the beast that rises from the earth. They're the counter testimony. And I think the testimony to the primary and the true world that emerges from Calvary, right? And some of those concepts that Calvary is the moment of cosmic creation. John Bear plays with those ideas, I think, beautifully. And so, why must they die, right? And I think that connects somewhat to Paul's idea that I have been crucified with Christ. Is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And this idea of resurrection life, and I was thinking about it in a discussion with a friend, kind of an extended discussion we've been having for a few weeks now. But if you go back to where Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life at the raising of Lazarus, what's very interesting is that he's saying that prior to his own death, right? That he is the resurrection and the life. And so the moment of his death is already encompassed by his resurrection life, right? And so those who would bear witness to Calvary must also die at Calvary with Christ, right? And they're at odds with the false witness that comes from the dragon and Leviathan and the beast from the earth, that are trying to basically assert a different paradigm of creation that kind of exists under this serpentine control, right? And they actually are killed by the serpent, right? They're killed by the dragon,
right?
And their bodies are left out to the elements, and then they are resurrected kind of in this chariot of fire type moment that's reminiscent of Elijah's ascension into heaven.
Oh, wow.
And are vindicated in their resurrection. And so, it was, that experience for me was, it was a touchstone one that really shifted the course of my life in some sense, because, I've grappled with its meaning now for a decade. And so when I think of, what that was, there was this deep sense of identification that I was one of these, and the other was the other bearing Christian witness, right? That I had almost like a fraternal or brotherly or sisterly type of a relationship with.
Yeah, like it's like would you say, not an individualistic experience, but a communal experience?
Like I felt like I was involved intimately at an identity level, intimately with these two witnesses, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't just me. It was more archetypal and universal, right?
Yeah. Well, this dream actually felt universal.
Right.
It didn't feel like it was about me when I had it, and I actually don't feel comfortable talking about it in terms of me.
Right.
But at the same time, it's fractal. So, it's going to touch on you too, right? It's universal. It's going to.
Yeah.
I felt like, oh, something's coming. And here's the thing I want to ask you now. Do you think that has anything to do? Like, could that be a symbolic representation of the death of those two witnesses by the serpent as baptism?
Yeah. So when James and John were asking Jesus if they could sit at his right and his left hand, right? And he says, well, sit at my right and my left are not for me to give, but to those to whom it's been appointed.
Yeah.
But he asked them, can you drink of the cup and be baptized with the baptism that I'm about to be baptized with? And they're kind of ignorant, but they're like, yes. And he's like, well, you will be.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
is death is that moment. There's that liminal space of death within the resurrected life. That so the resurrected life encompasses and swallows death, but it undergoes death at the same time, right? So it's this ordeal that the witness must undertake in the process of, let's look at the vocation of witness. In order for the vocation of witness to be fulfilled, right, you must die with Christ, and in the manner in which Christ died. And we can look at that in more at an archetypal level. Like, I don't think we're going to go and be nailed to crosses necessarily, but that death is in some sense, his death is always an element of what our deaths mean. Is the primary element of the meaning of
Yeah.
our own.
And wait, something else is just coming to mind because, okay, so the closer to the crucifixion, the more those martyrs or witnesses' deaths looked like Christ's, for one thing.
Right.
And the more public they were, right, just as his was.
Right.
And my building was public. It was a public building.
Right. Well, and this is taking
Throw
place,
that
I
in
think.
there.
Yeah.
Just
Well, I think if you look at kind of the spiritual topography of John's vision, it seems to be very much centrally located around the temple, right, as the locus of both divine activity, but also this locus of where the primary deception is taking place.
And of course, we are all the temple.
Right. And so this point of action in this place of, is your temple the house of the divine presence, or is it the house of a false paradigm? Right. Two different, this collision of two paradigms, the serpent's world or the heavenly world that is represented at the temple and coalesces in us as our bodies. Right. And in the both in the Dharmic traditions, whether you go into Buddhism or the Vedic traditions and beyond, I think that their insights are really instructive here. Is that there is that distinction between the ego, the empirical ego, the psychological self that we experience in our daily life, and the witness is this transcendental other that is still us, that I would say is probably synonymous with like that idea in the Vedic traditions of the self. In the Buddhist traditions, that they have that idea of no self, but is still this interconnected reality that arises out of the emptiness, that observes and witnesses the realm of experience that we undergo here in samsara, the world of the karmic world, essentially. There's an aspect to our personhood and our personality that is transcendental and observes the goings on in the karmic world, the cause and effect, where things are interdependent and interlinked, fundamentally, right? And so that witness, I think, in the context of Christian witness, there's a vocation, there's a calling with that witness to bear witness to and testify of the truth. And I think the central truth in the book of Revelation is the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. That is the foundation of the world. That comes down to us and manifests in real space-time within a real person, a living person, Jesus of Nazareth, who is crucified and dies and is buried and is raised again. And in the book of John, that is the creation. That's where we see this kind of this merism, which is kind of a connecting point of an example of a merism in the Bible would be, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth are a merism, a relationship between these two kind of opposite poles, where it's like God creates the heavens and the earth and everything in between. That's what's happening in Genesis 1. And you get the same merism of in the beginning, NRK in the Gospel of John begins with the beginning, and it's completed to telestai is what Jesus's cry
Right.
is from the cross
Yeah.
in the Gospel of John, is the beginning and the completion of creation is actually happening at the cross,
Right.
right?
Right.
And the witnesses that, because I think, I'm of the belief that the author or author community is one and the same of the Gospel of John and the Apocalypse of John, is the two witnesses are actually present in the Gospel of John as well. And you see that primarily in the trial scene in the Gospel of John, where the beloved disciple is known to the Sanhedrin, so probably of some sort of priestly family would be my guess. And Peter are there as witnesses, as Christian witness at the scene of the trial, but Peter disappears. Right? He denies Christ and he disappears. And we have that archetypal reality within ourselves. We retreat from that field of action at times. And so you have one witness, really, and then one witness and three Marys, which I'll leave the three Marys alone for right now. But you have John as the one witness at the foot of the cross. Where is the second witness? Because I think sequentially what's happening is the Apocalypse of John is predating the composition of the Gospel of John. So, that reading community would be like maybe making that kind of a connection. Who is the second witness for, at the foot of the cross? Well, it's you, the reader,
Right.
have become the second witness who's taken Peter's place. Right. And so you are, as the reader of the Gospel of John, are invited to bear witness at the foot of the cross with the beloved disciple. And so it there's there's an exegetical reading, and I'm going to leave that alone for now and focus on the transcendental aspect of that, of what's happening there in the Gospel of John. And at the transcendental level, the reader is invited into this space of transcendental witness, which, if you want to say third person observer, you're the third person observer of Calvary in the very act of reading, in a spiritual act, in the transcendental act of reading. And what you're bearing witness to is the creation of the cosmos. Because what Christ is doing in dying on the cross is he's creating the cosmos. He's bringing it to its full completion. All of God's creative purposes set forth in the beginning have been completed there.
Right.
And it's a profoundly different world than the world that was occupied by the Sanhedrin and by Pilate, who hand Christ over to be crucified, and they're representing these kind of, the kind of the bureaucratic world of politics and religion in some sense, that is very much concerned with the status quo and maintaining that status quo. I don't think there's all kinds of ways to look at what's happening there, and sometimes very anti-Judaism type ways of looking at what's happening at the cross. But I think it's more systematically, if Jesus had come into a different kind of religious community, the same thing would have happened. It so happens that he's incarnated as a Palestinian Jew, in the Commonwealth of Israel at the time, in the first century. But we run against these realities, these kind of bureaucracies that, while they want to, in some sense, very much, imperial Rome and the Jewish temple, Second Temple at the time, they were their own kind of cosmographies, this own sense of like the imperium and the universal rule and domain that was the cosmos. And they're trying to maintain this very tenuous and volatile status quo. Right. And Jesus represents one who is putting those systems to question, right? And to be a witness in that context is to testify. The testimony of the witness is the one who testifies to the truth, is that the world as it appears the world as it looks to us at the level of common sense analysis is actually not the cosmos that God has created. It is that domain. So it's, Jesus in John 12 says, now, the archon of this cosmos is cast down, and I will drag all people to myself. So Jesus is pulling us out of the false world into the real world. He's doing it I think that's a universal statement. I don't think anybody is excluded from that movement from the world of the serpent into the world that is created at Calvary. And there's a different principle of life. So Jesus was raised from the dead, but he was already the resurrection and the life. He was the resurrection and the life in his dying breath. So what we're bearing witness to is a resurrected cosmos that is the creation itself. And we are inhabitants as resurrected beings in that resurrected world.
Sorry for interrupting, but
no.
why do they have to die? That was my question about my dream. I'm like, why do they have to die?
Well, why does Christ have to die? How is his death?
Okay, well, that's why I asked about baptism, right?
Right.
So it's kind of like a rebaptizing of, to steal Lewis's quote about having read Phantastes. It baptized his imagination.
Well,
I'm doing Blake right now, right?
Okay.
And Blake calls Jesus the imagination. So
right.
Interesting.
I think this just as a kind of an aside, I think that there's a way of, like, a Trinitarian analogy that is at play in the imagination, right? Is if we can draw the analogy of the Father as the imaginator and the Spirit as the inspiration.
Right. Yeah.
And Christ is the living image or the living imagination of the Father, inspired by the Spirit. Right.
Well, we can understand this, Jed, as you being a twinkle in your Father's eye.
Right.
It's the same.
Right. And so in that cosmos, in the primary world, in the real world that God has created, the imagination, I think, in some sense, is recapitulating the Trinitarian life.
Yeah.
Right. It's the principle of co-creation that God is in viewing his creation with the capacity to enter into his imaginative field and imagine with him and imagine after him, and to cultivate the field, so to speak, in such a way that possibilities that could not arise outside of our imaginative input, in some sense, that's been destined from the foundation of the world. And so it is a completed act, but we participate in time in this co-creative capacity in the kingdom of the Father.
Okay, wait, I've got one more question. Just something's coming up for me, because I'm thinking about who these witnesses are. And you mentioned Elijah and Moses, who I've always seen as the law and the prophets.
Right.
And then you talked about us being the witness that's missing, and John being there from a priestly family.
Right.
So could we translate that scenario to John as the law, and we as the readers being the prophets, because we're in the future?
Right.
Like, this would be all.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Right. And then if you think about the implications of my dream as a universal dream, right? And also a personal one, because it's fractal, right?
Right.
So I don't really want to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, just throw it out there. Like the law and the prophets have to be rebaptized.
Hmm. They have to undergo death.
Yeah, through baptism. Like they have to go down and be resurrected, right? That's baptism is death and resurrection.
Okay, so let me back into your vision a little bit more, just so that I am making sure that I'm tracking. So when you're going down to rescue, you're going down into the
Basement,
realm of the unconscious or the subconscious,
subconscious,
right? To bring the girl out. When you're bringing her up into the upper chamber, into the
to the
realm of the
conscious.
conscious, I that this is the one who you're perceiving in some sense is you,
They're
right?
all me. They're all
Yeah.
me.
Okay. Okay. So I'm tracking with you then.
Okay.
So death is the enzyme of revelation, the enzyme of transcendence, where what is being disclosed in that very act of the death of the witnesses is uh, that kind of it splits at that higher level where you're present and you are present.
Yeah.
You're present as the psychological ego, right? Sherry, the Sherry we
Yeah.
all know and love. But you're also present in this transcendental form that is morphological, takes on all different kinds of shapes and
Yeah.
form. And that's also Sherry at the transcendental level. So what is being revealed in this motion from below to above, ascent and descent,
Mm.
essentially,
Yeah.
is the self and is the nature of the self.
Right.
Is that you are not just confined to your empirical ego, the thing that we, for me, it would be what I associate with Jed. You
Mhm.
know, certainly that's a part of the picture, but
Well, for
there's
me, it was the me that was carrying the child.
right. And
Yeah.
that's what we're carrying within us.
Mhm.
And as we, in that motion of ascent, what we are realizing is that what we carry within us is this latent self in more of a transcendental or universalized reality, that in the realm of resurrected life you learn is there's fundamental, while there's discontinuity, there's fundamental identity being shared between this and that, and that they're actually one and the same.
Yeah.
And we see it through this like this splitness of the bifurcation into the two, that you realize is actually a manifestation of the one.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, that's all Blakean right now for me because I'm reading Jerusalem, the Emanation of the Giant Albion. Have you read
Okay,
it?
I've been a long time since I've wandered in Blake.
Oh, because it's all about the human being splitting and splitting and splitting into these different emanations, right?
Hmm.
And it's interesting because Blake calls this distinction with division.
Hmm.
Like they're suffering, all the emanations and the specters are suffering because they're divided from Albion
Okay.
and Jerusalem. Albion
Right.
is the male version and Jerusalem is the female version. Um, but he, in the very beginning of the poem or the whatever you want to call it, the book, the prophetic book, he talks about the abomination of desolation,
Uh-huh.
which is also from the book of Revelation. And the abomination for Blake, the abomination of desolation is the dividing, is the distinction with division.
Hmm.
It's the splitting off of all the parts of Albion and Jerusalem into
Hmm.
their emanations, into their specters. And
Hmm.
Blake wants to bring them all back to the one man, he calls it, with the capital O.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I don't know why I got on that track. You said you were talking about
Well, it's
splitting.
interesting because
That's
Blake
what
is
it
also
reminded me.
Blake is also the poet who has dined with the prophets, right?
Oh, tell
So
me more
I
about
forget
that.
which poem but he's striking this identity that he too has dined and he has taken supper with the prophets themselves.
Well,
Right.
in what we read today, the angel that spoke to Joseph spoke to him.
Mm-hmm.
And he gives this scenario of the conversation that went on between Mary and Joseph um, when she told Joseph she was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason he knows it is because the angel that spoke to Joseph spoke to him.
Right.
And then Michael Martin read us a few letters that he wrote to people where he literally saw like an angel showed up in his room and he's like, how do I know you're not a demon? And then the angel would show him things and he's okay, you're not a demon. What do you have to tell me? So he wasn't just like these weren't just like voices in his head.
No.
He was literally seeing things. You know what, Matthew, if you want to join, I'm going to throw an invite in. I want to throw an invite in so other people can join if they want to and help us out with this. This is we're just doing what Jed and I love doing. We're just
Riffing.
drifting around in the landscape of curiosity. Exploring. We're exploring.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, in that poetic moment of inspiration, and Blake is so interesting. And it has been a while since I've read Blake, and I'm
Mhm.
kind of now I'm like, oh, well, now I need to go back and start reading some more Blake.
Mhm.
Um, but he's acutely aware as the poet, and I think if we can take that archetype within ourselves as the poet, right,
Yeah.
is the poet is transparent and open to the realm of experience. And I take these experiences that Blake has, like at some levels, almost a very literal experience for him.
Yeah.
That seems audacious to us, like, oh, okay, yeah, William Blake, speaking with angels and prophets and demons and all this stuff. He did. He's clearly had to in order to write what he wrote.
Oh
You know?
yeah, like that was one of the questions Michael asked this morning was did he see this? Did he make it up in his imagination? And I asked myself the same question when I was reading that section because it was so specific.
Right.
I thought to myself, he saw this because it's like me telling the dream. Like I can't just do that off the top of my head. I have to grab from the images and tell the thing,
Right.
right? So no, this is something he definitely saw it.
Yeah. Well, and he definitely imagined it.
But yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, he imagined it.
Right.
I mean, you
It's
couldn't see it.
both. And
You actually
it's
couldn't see it without an imagination.
yeah.
You
In
know?
the realm of I mean, the imagination is for the poet. That's his sense, his primary sensory organs. Right. It is. It's
Yeah.
his. The imagination is the pathway into poetic perception,
Yes.
and you can't enter into that space without actually perceiving it.
Yeah.
You cannot write
Right.
poetically of
Right.
what you
Right.
have not experienced and what you do not know.
Yeah, that's like the mirror in Lilith when the raven jumps through the mirror and then Mr. Vane is like sees a landscape. Like so his perception has already changed and enabled him to. Then I love this part so much because he's leaning towards the mirror because he realizes it's not reflecting him back.
Hmm.
And he's trying to get it close because the raven's way off in the distance, just a speck. So he leans forward and falls through. And to me, what MacDonald is saying about that is it's almost involuntary,
Right.
right? Like all you need is curiosity. Curiosity forced him to follow that man up the stairs, right?
Right.
And curiosity made him approach the mirror, and curiosity made him approach closer, and then he was in.
Right. And then he bears witness throughout the narrative.
Right.
Right.
And he just
And,
wants to go home. That's the first thing he says. I want to go home.
Right. Well, and I think we all do,
Mhm.
but the journey back home, once you find yourself in that world of imagination, it's the same journey to the cross and beyond it.
That's exactly what McDonald goes on to say, because he says, home is where you go in and out. And he's riffing off of John 10:9, where it's Jesus says, I'm the door, and the sheep go in and out and find pasture. And
Hmm.
Tomberg talks about the same thing in regards to Teilhard de Chardin,
Hmm.
who could go in and out of the Christian world into the occult sciences. Right. He could, because he went through the door. He went through Christ.
Right.
And that's, and McDonald says that's where home is. That's home. When you can go in and out. And if Nate was here, he'd be like, oh, that's the open world, right? Like, it's not the closed world of the serpent, but it's the open world.
Right.
Yeah.
When he's like the concept of, I've been reading, I've actually been listening to some fantastic lectures on Chardin. He's I see, I mean, Chardin is such a massive thinker that I'm longing to spend more time with.
Mm-hmm.
But his kind of his Christology and his cosmology are of the same piece,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that mysticism and in some sense life in the cosmos is the Eucharistic meal. There was a lecture that I was listening to about that.
Mm.
The Eucharist is that cosmic meal, that invitation into the open world, that still has a kind of an end point for Chardin, which is the omega point. But even in Chardin, that opens itself up into the realm of the infinite, right? It's a cosmos that is completely transparent to the infinite world that Christ has now opened up,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that the whole cosmos is consciously participating in that Christ consciousness of which he, kind of famously explores. And, so, and to reconnect that to some of like the Buddhist teachings that I've been reading, I've been reading a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh lately. And he speaks of these Dharma doors, that there's like, I don't know, 84,000 Dharma doors, right? Or doors into this dharmic world of the primary teaching. And Jesus says, I am the door,
Right.
right? He is the door into all other doors. Because in his cosmos, like you enter into that cosmos through him, right? And that world then opens up and the Dharma is everywhere. The Christ Dharma is simply, it's the fabric of that cosmic space.
Well, the interesting thing about doors, I think the Celts had a word for places of threshold.
Hmm.
Right? A door is a place of threshold, right?
Hmm.
And they called it a thin place. So it's that very thin place between two realities.
Hmm.
Well, what we perceive as two realities, actually.
Hmm.
You know, this gets really complicated to talk about unless you want to get into a long, drawn out what's real, what's not real, and all that stuff. But
Hmm.
what's interesting about the door too is that it's also a frame,
Right.
and that's really well represented in Lilith with the mirror, because the mirror isn't just a frame and a threshold. It's also just a hard surface that only reflects you back to yourself.
Right.
It doesn't, like, it's like, it's materialism in a sense, right?
Hmm.
And so to move through that frame into another world, you literally has to change your whole frame,
Right.
and the mirror becomes transparent. So it's no longer a hard surface. You can pass through it, right?
Right.
You can go in and out.
Just like those the commie gates, is it Kamii, the open air gates that you see in Japan, and you also see them in other areas in Asia, right?
Oh, I don't know.
Where you'll be in the wilderness, you could be, and it's just a threshold of sacred space, right? It's
Oh,
just
wow.
it's just the gate. That's
It's like
all it
the
is.
thin place represented.
Right. And it's
Yeah.
not that the world on one side of the gate or the other side of the gate is profoundly different. It's the one who enters through the gate that experiences the difference, that you've crossed now this threshold into a different domain of experience, into sacred
In a
space.
different consciousness, really.
Right.
Yeah, like I don't remember it precisely, but somebody talked about it in the recent past. I think it's The Abolition of Man. No, what's the other? The third space trilogy book by
Oh, that
Siddhartha.
hideous strength.
That is strength.
Hmm.
When some woman is walking this garden path that she walked all the time, and then all of a sudden she crosses some unseen demarcation, and everything is different, but it's all the same.
Hmm.
This is just something that we perceive happens to us, you know, like, and I think it's really indicative of repentance, actually, in the sense of metanoia,
Right.
because it's through repentance slash metanoia, which is an actually like a change of consciousness, right? It's a change of it's a like it's a spiraling up of
Hmm.
consciousness. um you wake up to a new heaven and a new earth.
Yeah. I'm pulling something to read here in just a moment. But
Yeah, go ahead. That's all I
so
was going to say. It's just, like we hear about the creation of the new heaven and the new earth and Jerusalem coming down, right?
mhm.
But that can happen to us in repentance. Like literally, if we get on our faces before God and repent of something. And I actually think that this is really important, because it's not just this, it's not just the realization that you did something wrong. It's not regret, it's not guilt, it's not shame. It's actually when your mind and your body are in complete alignment with each other,
Uh-huh.
right?
Right.
Because your body is weeping, it's prostrating, it's weak, it's feeling, and the mind has made a realization, oh no, I need to do things differently now. I have,
Hmm.
it's a revelation, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead and read.
So what I'm reading from is Eknath Easwaran's his Classics of Indian Spirituality volumes. It's the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, and then this is the Dhammapada. So this is the Buddhist section, and this is in the introduction to the Dhammapada that Eswaran writes, um, and so he recounts. I think it'd be interesting to. This is just a few pages that I'll read. But this is the story of Siddhartha's awakening to Buddhahood,
Hmm. Hmm.
and let's play with these concepts a little bit
Sure.
after reading through this. So I'll just kind of begin as he's beginning his journey. He's already left home, and he's been a wandering ascetic for some time, and is determined to find that path beyond death and suffering.
Yeah.
So I'll begin here. Near the city of Gaia, he found a tranquil spot under a sacred fig tree in a carpeted place with fresh, fragrant grass. Folding his legs beneath him, he drew himself straight for meditation and took a solemn vow. Come what may, let my body rot, let my bones be reduced to ashes. I will not get up from here until I have found the way beyond decay and death. It was dusk, and the moon was rising, the first full moon of the first month of spring. So, about this time of year. Thus determined, full of peace, Siddhartha passed into deep meditation. When the senses close down and concentration flows undisturbed by awareness of the outside world, then the chroniclers say, Mara, which is kind of like Satan in that Buddhist world, Mara, the tempter, came, much as Satan came to tempt Jesus in the desert. Mara is death, and every selfish passion that ties us to a mortal body. He is the striker who attacks without warning and never plays by the rules. Any kind of entrapment is fair. First, Mara sent his daughters, maidens of unearthly beauty, each accompanied by exquisite ladies in waiting. Any of them, Mara promised, Siddhartha could have as his own. The Buddha to be sat unmoved and deepened his concentration. Next, Mara assailed his meditation with fierce armies, lust, cowardice, doubt, hypocrisy, the desire for honor and fame. Like a mountain unshaken by an earthquake, Siddhartha continued his plunge deeper into consciousness. Finally, as he neared the frontier in consciousness that divides what is transient from what is deathless, Mara appeared and challenged him in person. Who had given him the right to escape his realm? The Buddha did not try to argue, but it is said that he placed his palm on the earth, and the earth itself gave witness. The voices of millions of creatures could be heard crying out that he had come to rescue them from sorrow. At this, Mara ordered his armies to retreat. The dark waters of unconscious closed over Siddhartha, and he slipped into that profound stillness in which thought stops and the distinctions of a separate personality dissolve. In this profound state, he remained throughout the night. When dawn came, the tree under which he sat burst into bloom, and the fragrant spring breeze showered him with blossoms. He was no longer Siddhartha, that finite personality who had been born in Kapalavistu. He was the Buddha, he who is awake. He found the way into the realm of being which decay and death can never touch, nirvana. Unaware of his body, plunged deep in a sea of joy, free to remain there till the end of time, Buddha could have had only a faint recollection of those still caught in selfishness and sorrow. But the needs of the world cried out to him, the chroniclers say, and his heart was moved to pity. That slim thread of recollection was enough. Drawn by the will to lead others to the freedom that he found, the Buddha traced his way back. Then Mara played his last trump. You have awakened to nirvana, he whispered, and thus escaped from my realm. You have plumbed the depths of consciousness and known a joy not given even to the gods. But you know well how difficult it has been. You sought nirvana with your eyes clear and found it almost impossible to achieve. Others' eyes are covered with dust from the beginning, and they seek only their own satisfaction. Even in the midst of sorrow, do you see anyone throw away the toys of this world? If you try to teach them what you have found, who do you think will listen? Who will strive as you have? How many will even try to wipe the dust from their eyes? For a long time, the Buddha sat silent, contemplating the impossibility of his mission. These questions shook him to the depths. In a world of sleepwalkers, how many would listen to someone returning from a world they would probably never see, coming to say that love always begets love, and violence only breeds more violence? In a world guided by passions, how many would be willing to make the sacrifices required to base their lives on these truths? Slowly, his confidence returned. Perhaps, he replied, there will be a few who will listen. Dust covers the eyes of all, but for some it is only a thin film. Everyone desires an end to suffering and sorrow. To those who will listen, I will teach the Dharma, and for those who follow it, the Dharma itself will set them free. The Buddha remained in that spot for weeks, immersing himself in nirvana over and over. Each time he probed deep into the heart of life, the nature of happiness, and the origins of sorrow. Then, with his teaching worked out, he went forth to teach. He had not only attained nirvana, he was established in it, aware of life's unity not only during meditation, but at every moment, awake or asleep. Now he could help others to make the same crossing. A kind of cosmic ferryman, he is represented as always calling koi paraga, anyone for the other shore.
You know, I feel really tempted to right now play that clip that I sent you
Sure.
because he talks about these 5 different levels in that clip, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
the jhana.
yeah, just let me give me a second and see if I can. I got to look up the email here. Mhm. it is. I recognize the title. Did
It
you
is
like
a
it?
pretty awesome story, by the way, Matthew.
Here it is. Okay, let's see. Open with. Okay, cool. All right, hang on. I'm going to share screen here.
Okay.
I'm actually getting good at this. All right. How does it look over there?
Looks
Okay,
good.
perfect.
Yeah, we're good.
Maybe I'll make it big and then, okay, here we go. I'm going to click on here because I think we have to go a bit past what I clipped.
You can actually start to identify rather than with your bodily sense, you may identify with awareness itself. And you enter kind of like a state of consciousness, Roger in particular calls the witness, where rather than identifying with a bodily sense, you identify with kind of the witness of experience. And for a lot of meditation, teachers, maybe that is the end. That is awakening. Whereas for him and various people I know, that is just like level 2 out of 5. Then level 3 is where he calls kind of like God mind, or kind of. I think like God mind is the typical name, but some people also call it as kind of a feeling of profound oneness, where now what you're doing is that any sensation that you have, you tag it as part of you. I sometimes use like a metaphor that, I mean, maybe you've played Age of Empires. Maybe people in the audience have, like kind of like video games where you have, different, characters. Let's say like your team is the characters that are painted blue, and the enemy is the characters that are painted yellow. And so after you play for 20 minutes, let's say one of these games, whenever you see a tiny speck of blue in the screen, your whole body and system and mind is like, oh, that's me. I've got to protect that. That's part of my team, as it were. And if you have like tribal affiliations, you cheer for a particular political party or for a particular, sports or so on. You tend to identify with those who wear, the same colors or the same flags, and that feeling of like, oh, that's me, or that's part of me, is something that happens, but for every sensation in that third stage. And for a lot of people, actually, that is what awakening is kind of, you don't make a distinction between yourself and other. You kind of absorb everything into your sense of self. The problem, though, here is that you will have a very heavy sense of self. And actually, that still doesn't quite get rid of suffering because there's the universe to protect. And you have like kind of that feeling of you may die in a sense, but you're projecting it onto everything. Then the fourth stage is actually kind of the polar opposite. It's kind of like you rather than every sensation being identified with you essentially stop identifying with any sensation. And a lot of Buddhist practices, they tell you, hey, if you can smell it, if you can see it, if you can touch it, it's not you. Right? Like whatever you sense, whatever you feel, that's not you. That you're something
right
transcendent that is beyond experience in a sense. And if you do that, rigorously, eventually anything that happens, you just kind of don't identify with you. That's kind of like, oh, that's not me. That's not me. That's not me. And then finally, the fifth stage, which he calls no self and no center, is a stage where you kind of like stop habitually trying to decide whether something is you or not. So, in the third stage, by default, everything is you. In the fourth stage, by default, everything is not you. But in the fifth stage, any sensation that you have is neither you nor not you. So you just kind of like drop the clinging to try to have a self view at all. And essentially, when you are in that state, you drop the center. Like you stop kind of like trying to coagulate a sense of self or differentiate your experience into me and not me. And that is extremely freeing. It actually kind of like drastically increases the valence and the harmony of the whole experience. From a Qualia Research Institute perspective, all of that is kind of a transformation that you do to the structure of your consciousness, in particular, how you direct attention and how you bind features into a self model. And
I'm going to leave it there.
Well, what's interesting here, and I'm scrolling to something else here. Give me just a moment here. What's very interesting to me in this in his description of these different levels of consciousness that are arising in what is essentially jhana meditation that comes out of
That's what he's describing.
Theravada.
I loved how it's all you, it's not you, and then it's you and not you.
Okay, so remember how we've talked about, at length at times about this concept of obversity.
Yes, I love it. I love that. I'm so glad you gave me that word.
Right. Is obverse experience. He's talking about this, this sense of, interconnectedness where it's all me, this disconnected where none of it is me. And then the kind of the synthesis is he says neither nor, or you could say both and. Those are strictly equivalent, right? Yeah. Is that what he's describing is, so the obverse heads and tails of a coin, right? Is the coin. Heads is not the coin, tails is not the coin. Heads and tails together constitute the coin.
Exactly. Yes.
And so when I was listening to that, and I'm glad that we've got back to the video that you sent over to me, because I think that is, as we think about witness, is in some sense, like if we think of witness as the light of awareness and the world or us as the mirror, when you're identifying as witness, it's the light of awareness, right? Where it's diffuse, but the light comes to know itself and what is reflected in how it reflects in the world of conscious experience, right? So I get those feelings when I go out so I live just a stone's throw from the beach, and I'll go for walks on the beach, and I'll have this sense of, I realize that all of the things that are happening out there that I am seeing are actually truly at a physiological level are happening inside of me, right? That world that I perceive is out there, the waves, the sun, the birds, the people, the sand, it's all, in some sense, it's in the domain of my conscious experience, because I'm taking that visual and auditory input. It's being, wired through nerves and synapses into this brain that sits in darkness, right? And I'm interpreting that experience.
I just want to quickly interject, because David Abrams talks about this, how you can have the sensation of flying when you're watching a bird fly. Right. But he also puts it in terms of small children who will watch someone doing something, dancing or balancing or whatever, and their bodies are watching and moving.
Yeah. Right.
And in this conversation that I played the clip from, he talks about clocks on a wall, that if they're all on the same wall over time, they will synchronize. And they'll all be doing this at the same time. Right. Because of the vibrations in the wall.
Right.
Right. Which is actually not a bad analogy, because this is why resonance is so important. Because we literally pick up these resonances in our bodies. So when you're walking along the beach and the sound, the vibrations of the waves hitting the water, the wind, like all of that is playing on your body, Jed. And you synchronize with it.
Right.
You do.
Right.
Like
Well,
we
and
synchronize, human beings synchronize with each other in like and not just with each other, with animals too. Because when he was talking about that part, I kept thinking about how my cat will lay down with me and make me fall asleep because
mhm,
her breathing and her calmness will put me in, I'll synchronize with it and
yeah,
it'll, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, and so one of my favorite things to watch, and they come in usually in the mornings and in the afternoons, late evening, is the pelican. We down here in Southern California, we have the brown pelican, and kind of a weird looking bird, but in flight, I would challenge anybody to find a more majestic creature on the
Oh,
planet.
I bet. Yeah.
They glide, and they travel in formation similar to geese and ducks in a V formation. But they'll come down right onto the wave, and they'll actually draft off of the wave, just right above the breaking wave,
Wow.
and will travel along it. And without moving, they're not moving and they're flying at the same time, right? It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
But I'll have the initial sense in that field of vision, in that sense of awareness of the bird is flying, right? So in that phase of experience, which is valid, the bird is flying and I am watching the bird flying. But then I realized that what I'm seeing out there is actually happening in here, and I am the bird flying, or I am flying as the bird, right? It's pretty much right. Yeah, I like drum circles, by the way. They're fun. You got to hang out with the hippies more often. But so I am the bird in flight. I'm experiencing in the domain of experience. I'm identified with that. So there's that secondary level of interconnectedness that I forget the guy's name in this video but the bird is, I'm that. And then there's the obverse, is I am neither I nor the bird, right? Or I am both I and the bird. That's the same,
Yeah.
state, positively or negatively stated. And so in that realm of obverse experience, it encompasses, the isolated, the interconnected, and then the transcendental,
Yeah.
right? And it's all the same coin.
But it's really interesting how you have to make your way up there,
Right.
right? Like you have to actually, like these are levels of not subconsciousness, but consciousness,
Right.
which is interesting because there is an ascension,
Right.
right? Like you get the sense from the way he describes it that you are ascending, which is what I was doing in my dream.
Yeah. So it's Andres Amulisan is his name, right? And
Yeah.
in that video, he also is talking about like, well, what things obtain at every level, in some sense, in the realm of conscious experience. And he says it's the levels themselves are real, or he calls it valence, right?
Yeah.
The
Which
fancy
is
word for
exactly.
level.
I'm sorry. I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but I'm like, you're saying levels, and I'm like, yeah, and I'm in a stairwell with levels in my dream. But for me, like I said earlier, like this dream feels like a universal dream. Like it felt to me like prophetic, like something's going to happen in the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where everyone is ascending to these different levels, and bedrooms is interesting. That hasn't clicked yet for me either, but and then obviously like the last one in the dream is it's the end station. I mean the stairs go up but they end at the like there's an actual ceiling,
Right. Implying that there's something beyond that.
yeah, with exactly, but that I can't see.
Right.
Yeah.
But encompasses, well, if you break down the elements of these levels, you have like the mall as the public space. And in some sense, we have a public aspect to the domain of our experience and
Yeah.
different levels of public experience, right? Um,
What were
and
the righteous, sorry, Jed, what were the righteous people for? What's NG? What does that mean to Matthew? doing? Oh, what were the righteous people doing? They were just living in the building, in the upper levels.
They're the company of heaven, Matthew.
There we
Of
go.
the heavens.
And the two witnesses were up there too. And the snake went for the two witnesses first, but then I had the sense that it was going to try to devour everyone. So I had to go get the little child.
Right. So, but back to what you were into, the architecture, so to speak, of the dream. Right? You have these public spaces, but then you have these deeply intimate and personal spaces, the bedroom.
Yeah.
You have an intimate, personal, encompassed by the public, encompassed by the stairway that's going up to a level that is beyond the building itself, right? Which is the, maybe the transcendental, right? And so in each of us is that same kind of internal architecture of the public, the social, and then the personal, and then the transcendental.
Yeah.
And it's all one thing, right? But it manifests itself to us, as finite creatures in the domain of experience as different levels, right? It's of that same,
all one building.
It's the same white light that has to be broken apart in the prism into the spectrum of color, so that we can understand what the white light actually is. What is contained within the light is the entire visible and invisible electromagnetic spectrum.
Well, here's a question, Jed, because like I told you that the dream felt universal. I didn't really like talking about it in terms of myself, but it also works because it's,
right.
The universal is also personal.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh well, I lost it. Totally lost it.
What seems interesting is that what it says to me is like the microcosm and the macrocosm, while different manifestations, are the one reality.
That's what I was going to say. So this is about knowing yourself. Like Eckhart talks about this, right? And who was the Greek philosopher? Was it Heraclitus or Socrates?
Probably.
Know thyself. Somebody said that.
Yeah, Socrates. Well, yeah, but yeah,
Okay.
all the pre-Socratics were there too. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a, most mysticism will instruct you into an interior life that in going inside you come to know God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like I've talked about this in the past, and it makes people really uncomfortable because they think it's about what would that be? Like a solipsistic way of being in the world or something like that. But that first level that he describes there is realizing that everything is you and you are everything.
Right. Well,
but
and
you have
door
to get there by going inside.
Right. Well, the door to the inner and the door to the outer are the same door. In Christ is the door.
Yeah, that's the quote from John 10:9, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus says, "I am the door, and the sheep go,
Right. So, and that's where so I'm a part of a community out here in where I live, a town called Carlsbad, California. There's a community out here called Current Collective. They're actually on Instagram. You can check them out. It's really cool. It's kind of a little bit of an experimental community of Christ-centered dharmic practice, right? So it's really cool, and I've become I've only been going here for a few months, but I've become close with some of the people in the community. It's a really special place, and kind of a place that I've looked for a long time, and it's like it just so happens to be, I can walk to it in 5 minutes, But we were talking about this because I had gone down with the guy who heads it up, a guy named Luke. We had gone down to Dharma Bum's temple down in San Diego, which is just like a Buddhist temple, and we're going to a Zen meditation class. And so we discuss these Buddhist concepts all the time. And And I was talking with Luke. I actually met with him for coffee on Thursday, and I was like, I said, I love exploring this Buddhist space and how it can dovetail into authentic Christian experience. I said, but I keep coming back to what is singular and unique about Jesus at the same time. Like in some sense, I see a deep fraternal bond between Christ and Buddha, right? As they're not teaching, they're teaching from different points of emphases. And, obviously Buddha has a very different understanding of deity than Jesus does. So I'm not trying to equate them. But what is it that's so different about Jesus? And we had we had some turmoil and some chaos at home over the weekend, last weekend. Just, we got a crowded house with animals and things were just, the energy was just chaotic. And I needed some space, and I went down to the beach, and it was just, I knew even my own thinking wasn't right. And I was really in touch with just the sense of suffering that exists within all of us. Right. And I was sitting in the beaches, getting close to 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. So it's dark, and just trying to calm myself. And if you go in some ways, like an unhealthy way of going into Buddhist teaching is that the suffering is irrelevant, or it doesn't matter, or that the person and the self doesn't matter. Now, a good Buddhist will teach otherwise. So don't want to create a caricature there. But as a Christian, like, I was sitting there, and there was something in kind of this moment of touching into my own suffering, and touching into the suffering of my family, and then kind of the suffering that was all around us, which is a profoundly Buddhist problem as well. And I felt the living presence of Christ with me. And there was a sense where it was like he was just gently reminding me that this matters and you matter. Right? This matters to me. Your suffering is important to me. It is not irrelevant. And it was like a moment of a fresh experience of what it means to be saved. Is like, as opposed to some of these ideas of nirvana where there is no self. The self is, absorbed in this interconnected field of emptiness, which is beautiful, by the way. But if that's all there is, like, there's a sense of irrelevancy that my mind goes to. But there's this Christian sense where the person matters. The person is the locus of the saving activity, is the subject of resurrection life. And if there's anything profoundly unique to me in the legacy of Christian teaching, so much of like the early Christian debates about the Trinity and the dual natures of Christ really centered on what is a person.
Yeah.
Right. So in establishing Christ's personhood, Christians came up with, in some senses, radically new insights into what the nature of personhood is. And the person is saved. The person in the Christian concept is an everlasting, there's an infinite quality, maybe a created infinity, right? A quantitative infinity, but the person goes on, and like Gregory of Nyssa would say, like, is the subject of epictastic experience, of this ever ongoing outstretching experience of the divine life through whatever levels or valences of reality there are. They're all there for us to encounter God in and through the life of Christ in us as resurrected creatures.
So what you're talking about then is that in Christ, like in Buddhism, there's a sense of oneness with everything. But according to this clip that we watched, that's only like level 2.
Right.
Level 5 sounds very Christian because it's kenotic, right? It's you and not you. And so what I thought was really interesting about that was that he used the term, you stop clinging.
Right.
You stop clinging, right? And I've always thought about the duality that we find ourselves in is really in this having, clinging, and being. So it's a closed closed-fisted and open-handed way of being in the world, right? And
Right.
the you and not you is an open-handed way of being in the world, where because you are no longer having. And I think that the reason that people want to have is because they think that they can control, right?
Right.
And it's not about power. It's not like malevolent or anything. They're having anxiety, like you had to get to the beach, right? It's too chaotic. It's all this stuff. So
Yeah.
now now you're going to take control and you're going to go down to the beach and you're going to take a walk, and that's all good.
Mm-hmm.
But you're still clinging to the fact that you think that you're making this happen.
Right.
Where how could you be in the chaos and still have the same experience you were having on the beach?
Well,
Like,
I think I
that's
did,
not
but it was not I who did. It was
right,
Christ in me, right? And there
right,
was a
right.
very palpable sense of his living presence in that moment. And it goes back to Paul saying, I have been crucified with Christ. It is not I who lives, but Christ lives in me.
Right. So don't you think that that's very much like a kenotic self-emptying?
Yeah. So in order to have a kenotic experience, that kenotic valence,
Yes.
there must be a self that can be unselfed
Yeah.
and remain self.
And still remain particular.
The I that is not
Yeah.
I is me,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Okay. Well, that's just really mind blowing for me right now, because do you remember a long time ago I told you about my 5-year-old experience
Hmm.
where I saw myself, the me that is thinking about me dying.
Hmm.
So like it was like thrice removed.
Yeah.
It was the witness. It was that witness. Like I kept thinking about these things, Jed, when I was thinking about my dream. I was thinking about that. I was, and there's a few other things, but and I could see myself, even though I was still physically in my room, and I was going, oh, this dies. This dies. But I don't die. And the
Right.
I that doesn't die, I could see.
Right.
And here's the thing. I'm like, that's me. Just like you right now said, the I that is not I is me. That
Right.
was the real sense that I had watching that going up. I was like, that's me. And I wasn't in, like, it was separated from me in a sense.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
it didn't bother me. Like, this has always really puzzled me because I was so little when it happened. I would imagine like any normal child would be like panicking because, wait, where am I going? Right.
Hmm.
But I was like, no, this is all like, it wasn't a facade. It wasn't fake,
Hmm.
but I was much more than this. And that was me.
Hmm.
So I know what you like. I have a very visceral sense when you say the I that is not I is me. I know
Right.
exactly what that feels like.
Well, and we
And
all do.
I don't
Share
mean I've
this.
been there or anything, but I just know the feeling I had at that moment as a kid, right?
Well, in some senses, so there's probably, and as singular as that experience was, there were probably times in your life where you weren't accessing that experience. Then you come back to it and you see it again,
Of
like for
course
the
not.
first time.
Yeah, of course. Like, you're constantly forgetting, right?
Right.
Forgetting
So
and remembering and forgetting and remembering,
that's Eucharist.
remembering.
That's Eucharist. That's a Eucharistic model of living. And so I think we all do that. Everybody this is paradigmatic and universal once again, right?
So could you
Is
call that could you call forgetting and remembering, could you call that like a dissolution and
right,
a reconstitution and a
right.
dissolution and a reconstitution?
Yeah.
Okay.
Veiling and unveiling, right? And the hiddenness and the manifestation. So in some senses, at the age of 5, you know this already. Before you've even experienced it, you know it
Yeah,
because it
like there's
is.
no way I could have known that, and like it had to be innate or
Yeah,
something.
so it's an innate thing. It's universal,
Mhm.
archetypal. And And so some of these things, like that realization of from Galatians 2:20, of the I that is not I is me. Like, I can look back and realize, and I'll read something that I wrote, that I wasn't aware of this and this at the same level, but I already knew it. In some senses, like I've always had there's always been a Buddhist inside of me, right? That's always been profoundly Christian at the same time. And I was, some of the things that were years ago were constantly on my mind as I would drive, through suburban Southern California, see road signs and strip malls and street lights and just this constant bombardment of commercial communication, and, feeling somewhat dissatisfied with some of that. And so I wrote a meditative poem on that. It's called A Strip Mall Hymn. And I'll go ahead and read that. And it's interesting. So as we kind of think about what we talked about in this conversation, it's all here. Like, it's already, and this was in the moment of poetic inspiration where I'm kind of transparent to that experience, but without really grasping what I was even writing in some sense.
Right.
So this is called the Strip Mall Hymn. I wrote this back in 2018. And it reads this: the flat light of an age-worn strip mall on the edge of a dying town, any town, anywhere and nowhere, of the pharmacy, of the fast food restaurant, of the supermarket, of the dry cleaner, of the smoke shop, calls out in the rain-soaked night where streetlight halos are mirrored on wet asphalt and echo the holy longings of long-departed saints, where the storefront's dim-lit promises for pills for peace from the storm-tossed bed, of food empty of the memory of the land that birthed it, or the blood ransom of the slaughterhouse, of wardrobes undisturbed by the frail fingers of the overworked child in an overlooked factory forgotten in some foreign corner, of carcinogens that make the pain of distraction tolerable. Still, these broken lights, pouring out on broken souls, speak of something sacred, undimmed, unhoped, and hoped, lingering beyond the wet shadows of the eastern horizon. Beneath the facade and the hidden frauds that shadow the back alley and the dumpster, the detritus, the distractions, lies something precious, hidden as precious things must be, of the self, unselfed and selfed in return. And free in the rain among the streetlight saints, and the faceless faces full of hope and lost hope, full of hope through the empty fullness of the soul, for the dance, for the hope of the dance, of baptism in the rain-lit night beneath the broken lights, where strip mall signs signify sacred longings that aren't for sale, that surrender at last to the stillness and to the dance.
I had I just watched an Aidan Kimmel interview, and he talked about
the precious man he is, by the way.
Oh gosh, yeah. He talked about the parable of the lost coin, and how the woman tosses her whole house upside down.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a neat and tidy search.
Right.
It's just a frantic search until she finds the coin.
Right.
And he also talked about the shepherd leaving, perilously leaving the whole flock to find the one.
Right.
And then, of course, he included the prodigal son. He says those should be seen as a set, those three together.
Yeah.
Right. Of the father just waiting, just standing and waiting, right? But I thought of the lost coin because your poem is talking about the hidden thing that's still there. It's underneath, right? And so, like in that parable of the woman looking for her lost coin, she knows she can feel its presence, just like you could in your poem.
Right.
You could, even though it was hidden and veiled and tucked away, and you have to search for it,
right?
Like the queen, right?
Right.
But it's there. Yeah, it's really nice.
Right. Well, and there's the that that kind of that messy aspect, you know, when in retrospect, you realize that that was a grace in itself. You know, here my dissatisfaction with seeing all these different signs along the way that were, you know, go to the drugstore so that you can get pills that'll help you go to sleep, or to the smoke shop where you can get tobacco that will help you, you know, smoke away a distracted moment, or go to the fast food restaurant where you can just, you know, eat your feelings and all these things. Like,
Mhm.
is they're calling out to us in the realm of desire, in the realm of samsara, of
Mhm,
suffering,
mhm, mhm,
and
mhm.
saying you can find satisfaction here.
Right.
And they're lying, but they're telling the truth, is you can
Yeah.
find satisfaction here.
Yeah.
Right, their light is the light of these signs. And it was, I saw it, you know, in my mind's eyes. I was driving by them in a rainy night in Southern California. That's where the imagery
Mhm.
comes from,
Mhm, mhm.
is like, yes, the light is there,
Yeah.
and the satisfaction to the true desire of the heart and the soul is there.
Mhm.
But in order to find that place, you have to, yourself has to be unselfed. There's a kenosis that has to happen. And you know, there's a common teaching in Buddhism, is that the world of nirvana is the world of samsara. They're one and the same.
Yeah. Well, that would make sense. I think that's a Christian teaching too, but whatever.
Right. And so, you know, in the Christian parlance, the world is ordered for our salvation. Right.
Mhm.
Everything we encounter is inviting us deeper into what it means to have been saved by the
Well, you
life and
can't get saved without desire. Just want to
right,
say that. And here's the thing. It's interesting. Mara is also Hebrew for bitter waters.
right,
And in Lilith, Lilith has to go into the house of Mara
right,
in order to be saved,
right,
right? I mean, and I don't mean that in the evangelical way,
right,
um, but yeah. So you have to pass through the house of bitter waters, which I think is what, the fast food joint, the tobacco shop, the liquor store, the druggie at the end of the road or whatever, or the drug dealer, I mean, they're all offering you is the house of bitter waters, right?
right,
That you have to pass through
right,
because you have to come to the end of it. Like you have to realize, in a sense, that there is no satisfaction in fulfilling those desires.
right,
It
right,
never really comes to fruition. The only way that you can, and it's counterintuitive, right? Because the only way that you actually become fulfilled is to empty.
right. Is
So,
to let go of the object of desire.
yeah, yeah. It's the open-handed, you know, thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's where, you know, in kind of one of the cool things in the kind of the digital age is there's been a lot of blending. We're all talking with each other a lot more, you know, across traditions, and
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
get those conversations. You can find them in a lot of different areas of the internet, and I'm seeing them kind of pop up in reality, you know, in like the community that
Yeah.
I'm in, is is that
Mhm.
in that kind of cross pollination of ideas, like there's an easy way to get lost in them, right? In this, like, they're, you know, we've all converted time and time again to one thing and the next thing, and, you know, like, I'm not knocking conversion, by the way, because I think it's an important experience to have, um, but I've gotten to a point where I realize that there is no future conversion for me that will get me into the realm of the ultimate, that will
Not in a
ultimately,
not yeah,
not in
not
the, not
it's
and not on the act of conversion, right? Conversion is important. It's a vital experience that I think we need to go through maybe a few times in life. Um, but it those conversion experiences, where you go from thinking this way to thinking that way, like metanoia and repentance,
Mhm.
and all that it's
it's integral. Like it doesn't leave the one thing behind. It's not a rejection of something. It's an absorbing and a moving forward.
in a reorientation
Yeah.
to the deeper and the fuller life. And what I realize is that it's, you know, repentance or conversion is the you know, is but one aspect of metamorphosis or transfiguration,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Transformation. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the call to like continually be transformed by the renewing of the mind,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
After the likeness of Christ is it's not like you know, you know, going from Baptist to Orthodox or from Catholic to
No,
Baptist or
no,
whatever it is. It's like that, and those can be important for anybody who's gone through that. I'm not saying don't, but what I'm saying is it's not the thing.
no.
And oftentimes it's not the thing you think it is. I remember going from kind of run-of-the-mill evangelicalism to Reformed Christianity was very much like a conversion experience for me. And I thought, like, this is it, right? And you know, and there's a kind of, I look back and there's, I like that it's kind of, it was naive but well intentioned. But
Well, it's
the
probably
discovery,
also like the bottom rung of the ladder,
right?
you know.
And like still, like my soul was seeking the promised land and realizing it's like the promised land is not any one tradition versus any other tradition in
No.
Christ's new creation.
But
It's like each of these traditions take up their proper place, I believe, in the kingdom. Like I don't, you know, I think that there's plenty of place for Orthodoxy and Buddhism and all kinds of different traditions within the kingdom, because the kingdom is universal. It's not parochial or provincial. But like the entrance into the life of the kingdom is, I think that's where we find that desire and satisfaction are the same movement.
desire and satisfaction.
So to thirst and to have the thirst satisfied, it, like when
Oh,
Jesus
okay.
says, you know,
Yeah.
come to me all who are thirsty, and you know, from
Totally.
you will spring fountains of living water, right? Is the acknowledgement of the thirst, but in Christ that both the thirst and the satisfaction of the thirst become simultaneous realities.
Yeah, but you have to be thirsty. Like this is kind of my point about seeking, you will find. It doesn't say seek once and you will find.
Right.
Which is kind of like your movement from whatever to Reformed theology and then on to the next thing, you know.
Right.
And that's the fallacy that we fall into so quickly, because we think that if we seek, we'll find it. But it is only found in the seeking. Like somebody asked me one time, what am I looking for? And I said, the journey. That's what you're looking for. You know, that's, or they asked, what am I supposed to find? And I said, that's what it was. What am I supposed to find? And I said, you'll find the journey.
Yeah.
Because that's the pearl of great price, and that's the coin, and that's the lost sheep, right? And the prodigal son, right? It's all about seeking and always seeking. And this is why I say, if you feel like you need to become an Orthodox Christian or a Reformed Christian, or move out of one sect, I was going to say one denomination into another, do it.
Go for it.
Go for it, man. Because like you should not be standing still. You
Right.
should not think that you've found it.
Right.
That's the equivalent of stasis.
Right.
Right? That's like stagnation.
Yeah.
So, I just wanted to read you a quick Jung quote that I picked up off Substack.
Sure.
I love scrolling Substack and finding juicy quotes. It says, to love someone else is easy, but to love what you are, the thing that is yourself, is just as if you were embracing a glowing red-hot iron. It burns into you, and this is very painful. Therefore, to love somebody else in the first place is always an escape, which we all hope for. And we all enjoy it when we are capable of it. But in the long run, it comes back on us.
Hmm.
You cannot stay away from yourself forever. You have to return. Have to come to that experiment to know whether you really can love. That is the question, whether you can love yourself. And that will be the test. And, that's always been a big thing for me because I personally had a difficult time with it. But I've learned through, my Christian journey that the love that Jung is talking about here for yourself is the same love with which God loves you.
Mm-hmm.
So when you tap into that kind of love and you take that interior journey, you're actually tapping into the source.
Right.
This is why I think Meister Eckhart is so big on, the virginal space within you, that God comes in and Christ is born in you.
Yeah.
Right. And when that happens, then you can really love, just as Jung says here in this quote.
Yeah.
That's the test.
Yeah.
The test is, can you love yourself?
Yeah.
Right. And I've been on that journey since 2008 of trying to figure out what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And it means letting go of everything, emptying yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and then encountering God in the interior space, which
Mm-hmm.
then allows you to encounter God in the exterior, in the outside. I
Right.
don't like to call it exterior because it's not part of you. Like you were saying about your walk on the beach.
Right.
Right. That's when you realize that everything is one, man.
Yeah. I know. It's always back to the hippies.
Although that guy in the conversation says, people who say all there is love and everything is one, they're kind of stuck in a little bit of a primary stage
Right.
of consciousness. But he said it's better to be there than anywhere else.
Right. Well, and you come back to it all the time, and like the soul's journey, like the thing is the journey when you realize that, das Ding, that we are all in such furious search over. It's actually the search itself and the elusivity of the thing in itself, the Ding on sich that,
that thing on
that Heidegger's so obsessed with. Right.
Yeah.
It's
That's the
like,
coin. That's the
right.
coin. The
Right.
Ding on sich is the coin, that you can't find. Right.
Right.
I mean, McDonald plays
That you
with
got to
that
turn your
whole,
whole house upside down to get to.
yeah. Your
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
And that in dream symbolism, the house is you, right?
Right.
You're
Right.
like, you're always the building. Whatever
Right.
building you're dreaming of, it's you.
Yeah.
That's what I
Right.
said to somebody one time, talking about the interior life, in my Father's house are many mansions.
Right.
Right. And didn't you read Piranesi, Jed?
I have not.
Oh my God, you have to read it.
I know Luke's going to be so mad at me.
It's such a quick read.
I
It's
know.
really not a big book. And yeah, you would love it.
I'm sure I would. I'm sure I would. Well, Sherry, I do need to get going into a couple of other things for my my afternoon.
Yeah, I was just gonna wrap it up actually.
So this has
Yeah.
been wonderful. It's nice to touch base and to hang out with the Grow Country folks for a while.
Yeah, thanks for entertaining my questions.
Yeah.
And all your insight. That was really good.
I enjoyed it very much, Sherry. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thank everybody for watching.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.